Let's make snare rolls. Why do we need snare rolls? We use snare rolls to build energy and intensity, typically in buildups. Let's build some snare rolls. This is a loop without a snare roll.
Why you want to act like that? Why you play hard? Play hard.
So what we're going to do is create snare rolls in the buildup section. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a MIDI channel. And let's name it snare roll. And let's create a MIDI clip. The next thing that we need to do is grab a snare sample. I'm going to use the 909 because it's pretty generic. I loaded up a snare in the channel. And we're going to do a simple pattern, 1/16. Let's just copy this across. This is what we got so far. Exciting, right? So the next step we're going to do is grab an EQ to remove some low end. So we're going to use a high pass filter to remove the low end. And let's put it around to 100 Hertz as a starting point. Next thing I want to do is use a compressor to thicken this sound up. So let's use a glue compressor. And we're going to set the attack to 10 so the transient of the snare can pass through. And set the release to 0.2 and leave the ratio to 4. Lower down the threshold and let's give it some makeup gain, about 3 decibels. It just thickens the sound just a little bit. Now we're going to get a vocoder. The reason why we're going to use a vocoder is to create our own white noise. In the snare, I'm going to go to classic mode just so I can shorten it up. So I'm going to lower the sustain. Now, with a vocoder, I'm going to increase the release. And then we're going to put the dry wet to 0. Before we move on, what we're going to do is create our own rack. So let's highlight the vocoder, the glue compressor, the EQ, and the sample, and group them together. Then with Ableton, we're going to open the macros. And for right now, we're going to leave the vocoder at 0% dry wet, because we'll get to that stuff later. The next thing I want to do is add a pedal just to thicken the sound just a little bit. So we're going to go to distort, put the gain about like 13%, and then put the dry wet to 0, and then we're going to blend in just a little bit of the distortion. 10% is fine. Now, this is where we're going to create a little bit of contrast for the snare roll. Let's use a auto filter right after the pedal and switch it to a high pass filter. As we approach the drop, we're going to start removing the low end frequency. Let's map the frequency knob of the auto filter to the first macro. And then click map again so everything's unhighlighted. And let's rename it to no low. So now we can use this knob to remove the low end. We need another filter to remove the high end frequency. Let's get another auto filter and place it right next to the first auto filter. And we're going to do the same thing. Let's map the frequency knob to the second macro. And let's rename that to no high. So the snare rolls are going to start off dark. Then it's going to progressively get brighter. So it will sound something like this. So let's start automating just a little bit. Let's make the snare rolls go from dark to bright at the start of the build-up. So I'm going to go to my no high. And let's do a rough sketch. I'm not even thinking about it. Let's take a listen to how it would sound in the context of the song.
Why you want to act like that? Why you play hard?
And with the no low, we can remove some low end information as we approach the drop. So let's make a little automation. I'm using random numbers. I'm gonna use my ear for this. So around 1 kilohertz sounds good to me. Remember, we also have a vocoder. We need to make this build-up sound more exciting. So let's map the dry-wet of the vocoder to macro 3. And let's rename this to noise. So as we approach the drop, we're going to add some noise to our snare roll. Do something like this. How can we take this a step further? Let's use reverb. Let's use Ableton stock reverb. I'm going to place it right after the last auto filter. And we're going to do the same thing. Let's map the dry wet to macro 4. Let's rename macro 4 to reverb. Everything happens towards the end of the buildup. So we're going to automate the reverb closer to the drop. And this is going to simulate putting the snare roll in a big space. Give it a little, little tail, just like that. So it sounds a little bit more natural. So let's hear it in the context of the song.
Why you want act like that? Why you play hard? Play hard.
How can we take this even a step further? What if we pitch up the snare roll? In Ableton's Simpler, we'll go to Controls. And as you can see here, we have a transpose section. Everything is about mapping things, right? So let's go to Map, click on Transpose, and then map it to macro 5. As we approach the drop, like I said, everything happens closer to the drop. We're going to transpose the snare roll. Let's experiment to hear how it would sound if we start to transpose it a full bar before the drop.
Why you want act like that? Why you play hard?
We keep pushing boundaries here, so let's do one more. What if we made the snare roll a little bit more stereo as we approach the drop? Alright, so let's grab a auto pan and let's place it before the reverb. So we're going to change from hertz to divisions. Let's put it to 1/16. And let's take a listen before we start mapping things out. Let's map the amount to macro 6. And let's rename it to stereo. For the last half a bar, we will automate the amount. And I'm going to use a random number because I'm going to use my ear as it plays. And right now it's at 50%, so let's take a listen.
Why you want act like that? Why you play hard? Play hard.
So let's hear the loop without the snare roll and then with.
Why you want act like that? Why you play hard? Play hard.
And with.
Why you want act like that? Why you play hard? Play hard.
Now you know how to make your own custom snare rolls. And using macros will give you a little bit more control. So use snare rolls in your buildup, hear how it sounds, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya! Ever dream of playing shows around the world? That dream starts in the studio by finishing your tracks. Because without releases, there are no gigs. If you are ready to take your production to the next level and start building momentum, I can help. Hit the link in my bio and let's start finishing music.